Greetings in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I welcome you to this midweek Bible study. Uh, we're going to start a new study of the three letters that John wrote to the church, probably the church in Ephesus. Um, I encourage you over the next several weeks to read these three letters. First John, of course, is longer, five five chapters. Then the other two are very short, almost addendums to the first letter. So why why look at these letters as opposed to Philippians? Philippians was a personal letter written to this church in Philippi, but uh, it has significant teachings to all the churches that Paul had founded in this Mediterranean basin, particularly in Macedonia. So one of the churches then that was founded was the church in Ephesus. And what happened was that the, the gospel had spread beyond uh, Philippi and had come to this crucial city of Ephesus. And it became crucial toward the last half of the first century because of the persecution that had happened in Rome. The Romans got tired of the Jewish influence, and in 70 AD, they uh, destroyed the Jewish temple, took it out, stone by stone, and the only thing left of it today is what's called the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, the foundation blocks. But that caused a dispersion, if you will, a scattering of believers from Jerusalem, which was the mother church, if you will. And they spread throughout Asia Minor, but Ephesus then being a central city and a bridge basically between Europe and Asia, called Asia Minor. So a lot of believers ended up there. And later, John, who wrote these letters, John the Beloved, the apostle, one of the 12 apostles, became the pastor of the church in Ephesus, um, particularly probably from the 70, 80 AD up until his death. We don't know exactly when he died, but he was certainly aged, probably in his 80s or 90s when he wrote these letters. He'd been pastor of that church for years, and the reason he wrote these letters is because of because of false teachings. Almost all the letters in the New Testament are written to combat false teachings and heresy. As the church spread and more people came to believe, there were false teachers that arose to try to hinder and infiltrate the church and basically water down the doctrine and actually to skew it into a whole different into a whole different direction. So John wrote these letters, and he is the same John that wrote the Gospel of John. And the reason we know that, even though John does not claim the letters, neither does he claim the Gospel of John. We know that he was the author of these letters, the first, second, third John, because of the themes that overlap and dovetail with the themes that are in the Gospel of John. It's the same grammar, it's the same style of writing, it's the same passion and it was written mainly to Gentile believers. By the time John writes this letter, even his gospel is written primarily to Gentiles believers. We know that in the Gospel of John because John's Gospel was written much later. It was written in probably 90 AD, toward the end of the first century. The other Gospels, what's called the Synoptics, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were written fairly close to each other and fairly soon after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus as the church began to expand. Their audience is somewhat different. Matthew writes mainly to Jewish believers. Mark is writing from the perspective of Peter primarily, so he's giving a little different view. And then Luke is writing to a Gentile. His name was Theophilus, and he wrote 2 volumes, that Luke and the book of Acts, to talk about the founding of the church and the spread of the gospel. But John's writing to believers that toward the end of the first century, the false teaching had become much more sophisticated and much more complicated. And he's writing to confront that. He's writing to these believers in Ephesus, but it's a letter that's certainly current for us today. And he's writing to encourage them to continue to be faithful. It's exactly what Paul was saying in the Philippian letter. Those threads that tie these books together. Paul's theme was to live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel. That theme ties right into First, Second, and Third John. But the reason it's important for us to study this book in our day and time is because of the continual rise and legitimacy of false teaching, of teaching that has a little bit of Christianity in it, but has a little bit of Eastern philosophy, and it has a whole lot of humanism in it, secular humanism. So it's called syncretism. You take a little of this and a little of that and a little of that, and you build a false religion that's got just enough of truth in it that people that don't know the Bible, that really haven't had a personal encounter with Jesus, will believe these false teachings. And we see it today as it's proliferated, with the media and with communication tools and the internet and all of that. It's more important today than it's other than maybe in the first century. It's more important today for believers to know what they believe and why. And so that's what John, that's what he's doing. He's writing to confront a particular false teaching that's known as Gnosticism. It's founded on the Greek word gnosis, 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 which means knowledge. And these people believed then that Jesus didn't live in a physical body. He was spirit, because they believed that the body was evil. The material things, particularly the body, was evil. So they had this dichotomy that the body was bad, the spirit then was good. And they believed that Jesus could not have existed in a body, in a physical body. He just appeared to be. He didn't leave footprints. He didn't eat. You couldn't touch him. And certainly then they didn't believe in the incarnation, that God stepped out of eternity into time and became a human being. They were teaching against that. It was false teachings. They didn't believe in the supernatural birth. They didn't believe in the sinless life. They didn't believe in the atoning death. They said he couldn't have died bodily, physically, because he didn't have a body, and they didn't believe in the resurrection. So in Ephesus, then, toward the end of the first century, that teaching had proliferated and was infiltrating the church in Ephesus and churches beyond that. So John then, as any caring pastor would, could not sit idly by and not do anything. These believers were being assaulted with false teachings, and there were particular teachers that were very charismatic, if you will, that were great communicators, that were traveling around to churches and teaching this false doctrine. So he then, this book, these letters then confront that. And as we read through these over the next several weeks, we'll see themes that are consistent with the Gospel of John, but also with the teachings of Jesus. And there are three major themes that we're going to look at. And one of those is that God brings life. And that's that he is the creator and the giver of life, that we didn't just happen. We didn't evolve. We didn't come from some lower species, that God gives life, and life is sacred in God. And then the second theme is God is light. He is totally devoid of darkness. And so one of the major themes of the book is that God is light and there is no darkness in him. And people that live in darkness, that dabble in darkness, that preach darkness are antichrist. They're totally opposed to Christ. So God is life, and we'll look at in the passage I'm going to read here in a moment that he is the word of life. So God is life, God is light, and God is love. Now, light will be has been somewhat emphasized this week with the total solar eclipse in certain parts of the country. There's here in Nashville, we'll just get a glimpse of that, and it's pretty cloudy right now. I'm not even sure people will be able to see it, but there'll be a period in that path of the solar eclipse of darkness, and God brings the light, and so there were those, to make an analogy to that were trying to block the light of God with false teaching. And so John is saying that we those of us that have the life of Christ living us, we walk in the light as he is in the light. Then the third thing is that God is love. And of course, that ties in directly with the Gospel of John, where for God so loved the world. And so we'll be looking at those three themes over the next several weeks. There's what ties those three themes together then in these letters is that he wants us to believe the right things. So it is important what we believe. So it's theological and doctrine. It isn't just feelings. That's what Gnosticism was a lot about. It was what you felt and all that. It was a false teaching. The second thing that ties those three themes together, if you will, is right behavior. It's not only if you have the right belief, your right theology, then that will be expressed in the way you live. It's like Paul said, to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. So we're going to be looking at this. I'm going to read the first 4 verses just to try to set the stage for what we're going to look at in First John over the next several weeks, and then we'll get to Second and Third John. But here he says, "What was from the beginning." So he ties it in directly to the first chapter of John, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And that ties right into Genesis 1, where it says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So there's this thread then that God is the creator. And so he's already opposing those that said God didn't create the universe, that it just happened. And there's people today that believe that, it's just, and some schools teach it, some people have bought into that lie. So, anyway, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have observed, what we have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. So, Jesus was real, John is saying. I touched him, I saw him. He wasn't an aberration, he wasn't just some phantom spirit. That life was revealed, and we have seen it, and we testify and declare it to you that the eternal life that was with the Father and was revealed to us, what we have seen and heard and also declared to you, so that you may have fellowship along with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. We are writing these things so that our joy may be complete. So that's what we're going to look at the next several weeks. That our joy in Jesus may be complete, but it's founded on the truth that God is life, brings life. God is light, and God is love. And when we believe that, then we live it in a way that others will see and know that we know Christ. God bless you. Look forward to talking to you next week.